Welcome to the deep dive. I want you to start by picturing the street you grew up on. Like, really picture it.
Yeah, the architecture, the layout of the
So
houses.
exactly, the exact distance from your front door to the corner store. Usually when we talk about our past, there's this baseline expectation of permanence, right?
Right. You expect things to stay where they were.
Yeah, the bricks are the bricks, the history is the history. You can point to a spot on a map and say, that is where I lived, and that is exactly what happened.
It's basically the foundational bedrock of our sanity, honestly. We rely completely on the physical world well, to hold our history for us.
But what if you woke up tomorrow, walked outside, and discovered that your childhood street was completely different? Or, even worse, what if your childhood memories or your past relationships had just been retroactively edited out of existence?
It's terrifying.
It really is. And here is the real nightmare scenario. What if you were the literal only person on Earth who remembered the original version?
That is the absolute definition of an existential terror. Because you aren't just losing your past at that point, you are losing your shared reality with the rest of the human race.
Which brings us to today's topic. We are opening up a sweeping, highly classified, and just incredibly sensitive collection of documents known as the Frome Archive.
Sometimes referred to in the sources as the Obsolescence archive, yeah.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to trace the documented factual history of reality editing, really records from 1952 all the way to the 2030s. We are going to explore how humanity went from experiencing these massive physical reality shifts to facing a terrifying modern crisis of mass isolation.
And, while the scale of the physics we're going to discuss is cosmic, it's really crucial to remember that the archive isn't just this cold ledger of reality breaking down.
No, not at all.
At its core, this is a deeply human story. It's about the profound and, frankly, sometimes heartbreaking lengths human beings will go to in order to stay connected to one another, especially when the universe itself is trying to pull them apart.
So let's start at the discovery of the archive, because the way this massive secret was kept hidden in plain sight is just fascinating to me. We begin with a woman named Evelyn Frome. Her husband, Leonard, has just passed away.
Right.
And by all accounts, Leonard was the ultimate invisible, middle-ranking civil servant. We were talking about the kind of guy who died quietly in his armchair reading a newspaper crossword. A man who supposedly wore the exact same haircut for 40 years.
Which turns out to be the absolute perfect camouflage.
Exactly what I was thinking. Because shortly after his funeral, two people, Marianne and a Dr. Singh, show up at Evelyn's door. They claim they're there to catalog Leonard's work papers.
And that's the moment everything flips.
Yeah. That is when Evelyn learns that her boring, rigidly predictable husband was actually a key member of a secret government team tasked with documenting something called the Obsolescence.
What's really staggering here is the sheer scale of what Leonard was tracking behind that boring facade. Between 1952 and 1994, he and a highly select group of others were documenting what they called macro edits.
And these weren't subtle changes, right?
No, not at all. Entire physical locations were rewriting themselves in real time.
The examples in his files are just completely wild. Let's look at the Barrow Street event in South London in 1974. Over the course of a single hour, an entire street completely changed its physical layout.
Just shifted completely.
Yeah. 47 houses became 52 houses. A heavy iron post box moved like 15 feet down the pavement. A corner shop fundamentally changed its name and its ownership history. Or, look at the Kettle event in 1967.
That one is unbelievable.
A small village in Hertfordshire had its historic Norman church entirely replaced by a pub called the Green Man.
And we really need to emphasize the mechanics of this. Because it wasn't that the church was magically demolished and a pub was built in its place overnight.
Right, it's weirder than that.
Much weirder. The fabric of time and reality was rewritten backwards so that the pub had literally always been there. If you went to the local library after the Kettle event, the parish records, the local history books, the old photographs, they all showed the Green Man pub existing for centuries.
So essentially, it's like an aggressive, instantaneous software patch for the universe. The developers push an update, and suddenly the physical map of the world is different. But okay, here's where I get completely stuck.
Okay, what is it?
If physical buildings and streets were constantly glitching and changing, like we are living in a faulty simulation, how did the general public not realize? Why wasn't there absolute mass panic in the streets of South London?
Well, because the reality edits didn't just change bricks and mortar, they edited human neurology to match.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is the cruelest mechanism of the obsolescence. The residents of Barrow Street didn't panic because their memories were seamlessly updated. They remembered growing up on the newly configured street.
So the pub patrons remembered drinking at the Green Man for decades.
Exactly. To the general public, nothing had changed because their own minds were part of the reality that got overwritten.
But wait, if the universe pushes a patch that flawlessly wipes everyone's memory, why was Leonard immune? Was his brain just wired differently because of his job, or did he just lack the imagination to accept the new reality?
You've hit the nail on the head right there. That is exactly why the government recruited people like Leonard for this specific project.
Really? Because he was boring.
Well, they sought out highly observant, meticulous, but crucially unimaginative middle management bureaucrats. For reasons the physics community of the time couldn't entirely explain, minds that were rigidly literal, minds focused entirely on recording data rather than interpreting it, were somehow resistant to the memory wipe.
That is so strange.
It is. They acted like a hard drive that refused to be reformatted. They retained the obsoleted versions of reality.
Which honestly sounds like an incredible superpower until you read further into the archive and see the personal, devastating toll it actually took on these people. Because Leonard wasn't just tracking vanishing churches and shifting postboxes. Reality was editing people.
Yeah. The psychological burden these documenters carried is almost unimaginable. In his personal hidden files, like the ones he kept even from the government, Evelyn discovers that Leonard retained vivid emotional memories of at least 4 completely different versions of his own life.
The Margin event in 1963 is a prime example of this. In the original timeline, Leonard stood in a church and married a woman named Patricia Hall.
His first wife?
Right. But reality shifted just a few hours later. The church was erased, Patricia Hall ceased to exist in any public record or anyone else's memory, and Leonard suddenly found himself married to Evelyn. He was the only person on the planet who remembered his first wife.
And the archive details events that are even more devastating than that, honestly. Take the Eclipse event in 1969.
Oh man, this one is rough.
It really is. This was a macro edit that surgically removed several people from existence globally. And during that event, Leonard and Evelyn's young daughter, Claire, was entirely erased.
I had to stop and put the notes down when I read this part. Claire was 4 years old. The files mentioned she had missing front teeth. And in an instant, she was just gone.
Just wiped away.
Yeah. Evelyn's memory was wiped.
Wow.
She had no memory of ever being pregnant, no memory of decorating a nursery, no memory of a child at all. And Leonard just had to wake up the next morning, walk downstairs, and have breakfast with a wife who didn't know she was a mother. He had to carry the memory of his child entirely alone.
Think about the profound isolation of that grief. How do you mourn someone who, according to the universe, technically never existed?
You can't.
Right. You can't hold a funeral. You can't cry on your spouse's shoulder because to them, you'd be grieving a hallucination.
I want you, the listener, to just imagine pouring a cup of coffee for your spouse of 40 years, knowing you are mourning a child they don't even remember conceiving. It is horrifying.
It's unbearable.
And Leonard wasn't an isolated case. The files mention Arthur Pemberton, another documenter who remembered a son named after his father for 63 years, a son who never drew a breath in the current timeline. Or a woman named Margaret who kept a hidden photograph of a fiancé she was deeply in love with, a man she had never actually met in the reality she was currently inhabiting.
It completely reframes Leonard's seemingly mundane habits, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because Evelyn originally thought his obsession with crossword puzzles was just the quirk of a boring man. He would buy 3 or 4 copies of the exact same daily newspaper just to sit in his chair and fill out the exact same crossword puzzle multiple times.
Because he was desperately trying to create fixed points in a completely fluid world, he needed something, anything, to stay exactly the same. The repetition was a survival tactic.
Precisely. It was a grounding exercise to keep him tethered. And that need for validation is exactly why the documenters formed an informal, off-the-books support group.
Right, the meetings.
On paper, they were just meeting to compare observational data for the government. But functionally, it was the only way to validate each other's sanity. By looking at Margaret and confirming that her fiancé existed, or acknowledging Arthur's son, they were staging a quiet, desperate rebellion against a universe that was trying to delete their loved ones.
So they find a way to survive this massive, shifting reality. But this is where the archive takes a terrifying turn. Because officially, according to the government project, the obsolescence stopped in 1994.
The macro events, anyway.
Right, the macro events, the streets shifting, the buildings disappearing, they supposedly just ceased. Reality seemed to stabilize and lock into place. But when Evelyn finds Leonard's secret files hidden in their attic, she discovers his final hypothesis. The reality edits didn't stop in 1994. They just changed shape.
They shifted from macro to micro. Leonard and Arthur started comparing notes and realized that reality was no longer executing large, shared edits that affected whole communities. Instead, it was deliberately fragmenting.
Right. Instead of forcing everyone into one updated version of reality with wiped memories, people were being isolated into their own custom reality bubbles. Leonard started tracking these tiny, persistent discrepancies, even among his fellow highly trained documenters.
Like the historical dates.
Exactly. Arthur remembered the Berlin Wall falling in November 1989. Margaret swore it was October. Peter vividly remembered Princess Diana dying in August, while the rest remembered September. And these weren't just memory lapses.
No, they were experiencing what the archive calls ontological solipsism.
Okay, we need to define that, because it sounds heavy, but it's actually incredibly relevant to how we live today.
Well, philosophical solipsism is the idea that your own mind is the only thing you can be certain exists. But ontological solipsism, in this context, means that your physical reality is genuinely, literally separate from mine.
It's physical, not just mental.
Right. The editing process became microscopic and highly individualized. Everyone was being separated into slightly different diverging timelines.
It is exactly like playing a massive multiplayer online game where everyone is running around the same server, but everyone's screen is rendering a completely different map. You think you're standing in the same room as someone, but you are literally occupying different realities.
That's a great way to put it.
Or, to use a more modern example, it's like how social media algorithms feed us entirely personalized, conflicting news feeds so we can't agree on basic facts. Except this is happening to physical reality itself.
And the danger of that fragmentation is absolute. If everyone experiences a slightly different timeline, objective evidence becomes mathematically impossible.
Because the evidence changes too.
Exactly. You can't pull out a newspaper to prove the date of the Berlin Wall falling if the newspaper itself prints a different date depending on whose hands are holding it. Communication breaks down entirely.
Wow.
In his final notes before he died, Leonard essentially wrote that he was becoming a ghost to Evelyn. Their timelines were diverging so much they were barely interacting with the same version of each other anymore. Isolation becomes terminal.
Which is just a heartbreaking way to die. But what I love about Evelyn Frome is that she doesn't just accept this. Facing the complete microscopic fragmentation of reality, she decides she has to fight back.
She's incredibly resilient.
She really is. But she has a massive problem. How do you fight back against the universe fracturing without sounding completely insane to the general public? You can't exactly put up flyers saying, reality is splitting into a million pieces, please hold. So she creates something called the Convergence Project.
And she brilliantly disguises it as ordinary, mundane, interpersonal communication workshops. She rents out halls and teaches active listening, conflict resolution, and techniques for verifying understanding.
And we see the payoff of this in the archive when a cataloger in the 2020s discovers these techniques are still being actively used at a community center in Islington. We get this amazing case study of a man named James.
Oh, the story about the dog.
Yes. James vividly remembers growing up with a family dog named Socks. He knows exactly how the dog smelled. He remembers its favorite chewed-up tennis toy. But his brother insists, aggressively, that they never had a dog. His parents agree, no dog.
In the past, or in a normal setting, James would have argued until he was blue in the face, or he would have secretly feared he was losing his mind.
Right.
But using the convergence techniques, he and his brother learned to hold what the project calls dual timelines. They sit down, they literally write out both versions of their childhood, and they accept them both as equally true physical experiences.
But I gotta be honest, I have to push back here, because this is where I really struggle with the source material. We see the cataloger in the 2020s start to obsessively track her own memory discrepancies using these methods, and she ends up in the office of a psychiatrist, Dr. Okonkwo.
Yeah, it's a pivotal moment.
And the doctor tells her she is suffering from severe dissociation. Isn't Dr. Okonkwo kind of right? Doesn't documenting and focusing on every tiny reality discrepancy actually make the paranoia worse? Like, doesn't acknowledging dual timelines just legitimize the delusion and feed the fragmentation.
It's a very valid critique, and it's exactly why the Convergence project is so incredibly difficult to maintain. It requires a massive amount of what Arthur Pemberton called epistemological humility.
Meaning what, exactly? Letting go of the ego of knowing the absolute truth.
Exactly. Epistemological humility is the profound acceptance that your version of reality is not the absolute, objective center of the universe. Evelyn's goal with the Convergence project wasn't to force a single consensus reality.
Right.
She realized that trying to force everyone to agree on one set of facts was what caused the fragmentation in the first place. The goal was to build bridges across the fractures. It is an active, exhausting, daily choice to look at someone and say, my reality says X, yours says Y. We cannot prove either, but you are more important to me than being right about X. It is the conscious prioritization of connection over consensus.
And there is a stunning, deeply personal payoff to this philosophy, hidden in the archive. Arthur leaves a posthumous letter for Evelyn to read. In it, he reveals a theory about Leonard's past. Remember Leonard's first love?
The woman from the Margin event?
Yes, the one who was edited out of existence before he suddenly found himself married to Evelyn. Her name was Ellen Marchmont. Arthur tells Evelyn that Ellen didn't actually disappear. The obsolescence didn't delete her, it just rewrote her into a different form, different name, different history, different face. Arthur believed, based on the timeline data, that Evelyn actually was Ellen Marchmont.
It's a hauntingly beautiful concept. It suggests that while the reality editing mechanism could change the external data, the names, the physical circumstances, the memories, the essential underlying connection between two consciousnesses persisted.
Incredible.
Leonard found his way to the exact same love, even across rewritten timelines.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. But just as we settle into this idea of surviving the fragmentation through empathy, the deep dive takes a massive leap forward. We hit the late 2020s, and we meet a new archivist named Rachel.
This is where things get really active.
Yeah. She connects with a group of people experiencing severe reality discrepancies. But they aren't interested in just surviving or coping with dual timelines. They want to grab the steering wheel. They want to fix reality.
This brings us to Kay's coherence field theory. Through studying the entire history of the archive, Rachel's group discovers something incredible about the nature of human observation. They find that if they can perfectly synchronize their focus, literally sitting in a circle and meditating on the exact physical properties of a single object, like a simple burning candle, until their consciousnesses perfectly align, they can intentionally collapse quantum probability.
Okay, stop right there. How does staring at a candle stop a building from disappearing or a timeline from splitting? Like, what is the actual mechanism there?
Well, because in quantum mechanics, observation is what locks infinite possibility into a single fixed reality. By forcing multiple isolated minds to observe the exact same physical properties of that candle at the exact same moment, they created a localized anchor, a coherence field.
Okay, I think I'm following.
They essentially created a gravity well of consensus that the universe couldn't overwrite or fragment. They realized they weren't just observing reality, they were generating it.
Which means they can force consensus. They realize they can actually edit reality themselves. And this leads to the ultimate mind-bending truth hidden in the final forbidden files of the archive.
The big reveal.
Exactly. For decades, the documenters wondered who or what the editor was. What was the force changing the buildings, erasing the people, and fragmenting the timelines? Was it God? Was it an alien intelligence? Was it some rogue AI running a simulation?
And the staggering answer is, the editor is us.
The editor is us. It completely flips the entire narrative on its head.
It really does. The overarching theory of the archive concludes that collective human consciousness has always been observing reality into existence. For most of human history, humanity had a relatively unified, localized worldview, so consensus reality was stable. We unconsciously edited our world together.
That makes total sense.
But as the global population exploded, as the information age hit, and as our communication became hyper-complex and our perspectives radically diversified, the collective narrative just couldn't hold.
So the obsolescence events, the vanishing churches, the shifting streets, that was just reality trying to forcefully reconcile too many competing human narratives.
Exactly. It was the system crashing under the weight of too many contradictions. And when those macro edits failed to keep us unified, the system fragmented entirely. We isolated into our own reality bubbles because our collective consciousness basically broke.
I am just blown away by the scale of this journey.
Mhm.
We started with this incredibly depressing, intimate story about a lonely bureaucrat doing crosswords because he's isolated in his own mind, and it transforms into this wildly empowering story about the next step in human evolution.
It's a complete paradigm shift. We see the entire evolution of humanity synthesized through these three generations. Leonard was the passive observer, meticulously documenting the breakdown of reality but unable to stop it.
Right.
Evelyn was the bridge builder, teaching people how to survive the breakdown through radical empathy and communication. But Rachel and her collective, they are the architects. They are shifting humanity from passive victimhood to active, negotiated reality creation. By aligning their consciousness into coherence fields, they are proving that humanity is evolving to consciously co-author reality. They call this new era the coherence.
Let's bring this all together for the listener. What does the Frome archive ultimately mean for us? We've gone from a guy in 1952 noticing a street changed its layout to the horrifying realization that loved ones were being erased and mourned in secret, to the modern terror of mass solipsism where we are all living in our own isolated feeds.
It's quite the trajectory.
It is. But the ultimate discovery is that human connection is the literal physical glue holding the universe's timelines together.
The archive is vast, and the quantum physics involved are theoretical, but the core takeaway is remarkably grounded and urgent. It serves as both a warning and an instruction manual. If we retreat into our own isolated realities, if we insist that our version of the truth is the absolute center of the universe, we will continue to fragment until we are entirely, terminally alone.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. The only way to maintain our shared world, physically and emotionally, is to actively reach out. We have to verify, listen with radical humility, and actively choose connection over the need to be right.
It is an incredible message, and I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over on your own. Toward the very end of the archive, the cataloger discovers an impossible object. It is a physical book, supposedly written by the author Doris Lessing, but the publication date is from the future.
That part is so eerie.
Right, and the bizarre thing is, when you open this physical book, the text actually shifts and changes depending on who is holding it. It is a book existing in multiple timelines simultaneously.
A literal superposition of documentation.
Precisely. And the archive states over and over again that the act of documentation creates its own reality. By focusing your attention on something, you pull it out of probability and bring it into being. So I want you to think about what you're doing right now. By sitting here, listening to this deep dive, absorbing these facts, and focusing your attention on this specific narrative, what version of reality are you collapsing into existence right now? And more importantly, who will you choose to share it with today?